Welcome to the Invested Dads Podcast, simplifying financial topics so that you can take action and make your financial situation better. Helping you to understand the current world of financial planning and investments, here are your hosts, Josh Robb and Austin Wilson.
All right. Hey. Welcome back to the Invested Dads Podcast, a podcast where we take you on a journey to better your financial future. I'm Austin Wilson, co-portfolio manager at Hixon Zuercher Capital Management.
And I'm Josh Robb, director of wealth management at Hixon Zuercher Capital Management. Austin, how can people help us grow our podcast?
We would love it if you'd subscribe if you're not subscribed, and subscribe to our weekly newsletter via our website, where you can get an email each and every Thursday when a new episode drops with some show notes and a direct link to listen. So, today, we are going to be talking about the very popular topic of regulation in regards to artificial intelligence. We're going to be looking at 5 pros, why it could be good to regulate artificial intelligence, and 5 cons, 5 challenges to this. Very balanced, 5 and 5, 10 total. Josh, come on. It's great.
Good. You learned your lesson.
Because the regulation does come with both pros and cons. Advantages, disadvantages, both sides of the story. We want you to be informed.
Yep.
So the pros of regulating artificial intelligence. Number 1 is really the ethical use case of artificial intelligence. Regulation can really ensure that artificial intelligence is developed and designed to be used with an ethical manner in mind. So it can't be used to do bad things, right? Yep. If you regulate artificial intelligence to some point, you can set standards and guidelines to prevent AI to be used to harm things, harm people, discriminate, invade privacy, surveil without consent, those sort of things. What do you think about that?
Yeah, there's a precedent to this in that when new technology comes around, there's kind of an early stage where there's not much, and then most new technology then develops either internally its own regulations or externally through government or whatever kind of guidelines. So, I think when the internet first really became popular, it was kind of this new frontier.
It's the Wild West.
Then since they've added on regulations to it, and Bitcoin and digital currencies are under that same thing. It started out and it was not regulated at all, and there's discussion on whether that will be more regulated.
Yep.
So I think whenever you have new technology that can be abused, you want to make sure there's some sort of safeguards in place.
Number 2, safety and security could be a benefit, a pro of some regulation AI space, because regulations can focus on making sure that AI systems are developed with the backing of measures that prevent them from being hacked, prevent them from being manipulated, and then you can actually have guidelines and rule sets out there of how to test and validate artificial intelligence to reduce the risk of failures, to reduce the risk of accidents, all kinds of things around that. So I think that the safety and security aspect is another pro, because right now there isn't a lot of that.
No. And, when you're relying on the information that's being gathered, and, I could do a Google search and I know where that's coming from, but AI gathers it for me, but I don't necessarily know where it got that information. So you're right. From a safety standpoint, we want to make sure the information it's compiling is right and not been manipulated in any way.
Absolutely. Number 3, accountability and transparency. So regulation, if you're thinking about it as it pertains to AI, you can use this to establish accountability mechanisms, which can make sure that organizations who are utilizing artificial intelligence, that they are held responsible for the actions and decisions made by those systems. So obviously everything has to flow back to some responsible party. You can't say the AI made me do it.
Yeah.
That's not a good answer.
Doesn't work.
So some sort of accountability system is good there. You can also use regulation to enforce transparency requirements, making sure that the algorithms used in AI, the models are explainable or understandable so that people can use this and understand how it's coming up with what is being prompted, turning into what is being spit out. One thing that is, in this sort of realm is ChatGPT is based on an open source AI code right now, and that's kind of the most popular one. And I think that that's the foundation of the rules going forward are going to be the transparent, open source sort of thinking around AI.
Yeah, I like that. It's, again, when it's coming back with information, to be able to understand how it gathered that is important to know if you can trust it.
Number 4, fair competition could be a pro of some regulation in the space. One way that this can happen in the AI space is by preventing monopolies in terms of artificial intelligence companies, kind of not allowing startups and smaller companies to have the equal opportunities to innovate and succeed. So that's something that some sort of discussion and governmental oversight is going to prevent some of the big companies from squashing opportunities from smaller companies that ultimately can turn out to be way more innovative because of the way that they operate.
Yeah.
So that's something that you could get with some regulation. This could also benefit the AI ecosystem by allowing it to be more diverse in terms of more companies represented, more dynamic. There are a lot of different options in the space versus just a couple through that.
No industry does well when there's not open competition.
Absolutely. And number 5 is public trust. This is one that is similar to what I think of when I think of cryptocurrency, because I think a lot of these regulation thinkings can be applied to that space as well. Kind of the Wild West there. It's kind of the Wild West in AI. But public trust is huge, and some regulation can really help the technology to be trusted by the public, because the public is going to know that some of those concerns have been addressed, some of those risks have been mitigated. They're going to have clear guidelines and oversight so that people have confidence in what's going on with artificial intelligence. And that's really going to allow more people to want to adopt and accept the use of AI in their daily lives.
Yeah. Yeah. No one's going to adopt or grow to a more widely accepted if there's no trust built into it.
Absolutely. So that is my 5 pros for regulating the AI space.
Let's do a dad joke here, and then
Bring
we'll come
it.
back to the other side, the cons, and maybe how regulations may hurt artificial intelligence. All right. So they're starting to incorporate this into more and more things. Do you know what you would call a luxury vehicle if it had AI built into it?
Uh-oh, I do not.
You would call it a Lexus.
I don't.
It's kind of like Alexa, but in Lexus.
Oh, like Lexus.
Yes.
Like the car, but
Yeah,
Alexis.
but Alexis.
Ah.
You call it Alexis. You smoosh them
I get
together.
it. I see
It was
you.
took me when you read it, it like pops right in your
that
head.
makes more sense.
But that's where it is.
I like Lexus cars. I think they look good.
They're nice.
They're Toyotas underneath, which means they last forever.
Yep.
Gotta love them.
Good service too.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
My grandma had one, and anytime they need something, they'd come get it, leave her like a loaner vehicle, and bring it
And
back.
those are the ones to buy the grandma-owned Lexuses. They were not driven hard. All right, now we're going to turn the page over. We're going to look at 5 cons, so the downsides to artificial intelligence regulation. And first and foremost,
Terminator.
terminate. Ooh, yeah. They could take over the world.
Yeah.
No, that's actually the pro would be
Regulation.
prevent AI from taking over the world.
Oh, maybe that's
that didn't make the top
there
5.
it is. Okay.
Don't think we're quite there yet. The number 1 con, the downside that I think of when I think of regulating artificial intelligence is stifling innovation.
Yep.
So innovation is very important for especially up-and-coming industries like artificial intelligence. And excessive regulation could potentially burden some requirements on development for AI. It can slow things down, which we're going to get to in a little bit. But I think that especially when you're looking at striking a balance between regulation and innovation being critical, because you need progress. You need to be able to continue to move things forward as AI continues to transform the way we do things. And I also think that when it comes to keeping up with, I'm thinking of countries like Russia and China who aren't going to have sort of the same restrictive oversights in terms of what we're talking about here, potentially bad actors in general. This could put us at a disadvantage as a country if we're too tight on regulations and restrictions for AI. We could fall behind, and then these other enemies, potentially in war and things like that, or economic threats, could use AI that's more advanced of their own to outdo us in certain areas competitively. So I think that that's a risk, stifling innovation.
Yep, I agree. When you have the people creating regulations that maybe aren't the experts in that field, you may, again, slow things down by making it too burdensome because they don't fully understand what they're regulating to begin with.
It's like the cryptocurrency thinking. Like you have these like 80-year-old congressmen asking questions about
They don't know.
They don't know how to log into the Facebook, much less know what a blockchain is.
Yes.
So I think educating is key. And we're going to talk about that here in a little bit.
Is AI part of my AOL email account? That's what their question is.
Yeah, exactly. Or like that WOH.RR.com, like the emails everyone got. Number 2, another disadvantage to regulating AI is slower adoption in general. Over-regulating things may slow down the adoption because all of these complex regulatory frameworks can create unnecessary barriers to entry, which can discourage organizations from really investing in AI altogether because of all the costs with compliance and things like that, as well as the uncertainties surrounding legal obligations that you could have because of the compliance side of things.
Yes.
So I think those are some risks. It could slow the adoption and the use of technology in general if it's over-regulated.
Oh, for sure. I think, and again, when we're talking about regulations, and you're going to see these in a lot of your cons, is just who's regulating really matters.
Absolutely.
To kind of the downside of all those, and adoption being one of those.
Yep. And third kind of ties into what we were just talking about with compliance challenges, because compliance is super important, and it can be extra challenging, especially when it relates to AI, for smaller companies with limited resources. And this can really add a lot of costs. A lot of smaller companies are going to need to hire specialized expertise, and that's going to slow down smaller companies and hinder their ability to compete in the market, because they're going to be having to spend comparatively more money on a proportional basis versus the larger companies. That's kind of the way I see this happening.
Yes.
These larger companies that are driving the AI ship right now, they're going to be lobbying for regulation to keep things in their favor, and they have the money to do it.
Yep. And being involved in compliance myself, whenever you get regulations, you get additional compliance issues. And so the government complicates things, and there are good regulations and good compliance that has to happen in many industries. But again, when you're moving fast and growing, you may overburden people with trying to comply with the rules you created with maybe not the tools needed to actually comply.
Right. Number 4, difficulty staying current if you have a lot of regulation going on. So because of the nature of artificial intelligence and how it's rapidly evolving, regulations could actually struggle to keep up.
Unless you have AI creating the regulations for AI.
I think you could that's a $1 billion idea right there.
Circle logic.
But this could lead to outdated regulations that are unable to address the challenges that are going on now, or even the ones that will be coming up, or to fully grasp the potential risks that are going to be associated with some of these modern and more cutting-edge AI applications. So I think that it's important to realize that this technology in particular, it's kind of a Moore's law thinking, like the amount of computing power and the amount of speed of artificial intelligence that is being continuously brought online today is literally exponentially more than it has been at any other point in history. And you need to be able to regulate at the same pace, ideally ahead, so that you know what's coming.
Yes.
But it's so hard to do that even right now, especially with our legislative framework and the way that we make laws and regulations here in the United States. It's not fast.
Oh, no, by no means.
Yep.
I like that.
Last, number 5, international harmonization. So thinking about regulation and tying it in with other regulations in different countries around the world, making sure we're all kind of on the same page, like an AI oversight globally. Very tricky. Everyone's going to look at this a little bit differently, but to get some sort of different economies and different countries being on the same page in terms of regulation will be pretty key, because this will avoid conflicting or fragmented standards across different jurisdictions. But one of the difficulties this will give you is the achievement of consensus on regulations, because it's going to be really complex. Some countries are going to want to do things differently than others. It's going to be very time consuming. All this stuff is going to potentially delay regulations further and put you even more at a difficulty of staying current, because by the time you got agreement on things, it's going to be old news. So there's a couple themes we've talked about here in terms of the cons. A lot of it relates to innovation and adoption, but a lot of it is also going to relate to just keeping up.
Yes.
It is amazing how fast AI is working, and regulation has to attempt to do that, or else it is going to be obsolete immediately.
Yes.
So I think in general, it's very important to strike a balance. This is why I talked about pros and cons between regulation and innovation, because there's a lot of benefits to AI. And we talked about that in our recent episode where we talked about AI.
Yes.
Some of the potential new areas for innovation and things there. We'll link that in the show notes. If you have not listened to it, please go do so. But we have to admit, there are definitely some risks here, and a lot of flexibility and adaptivity is going to be very key, as well as ongoing dialogue between policymakers, researchers, industry professionals when it relates to regulation. That's something it's going to take time for it to play out. Now, recently, a bunch of technology company leaders, including Elon Musk, Apple co-founder Steve Wozniak, they signed an open letter in March, which was calling for a 6-month pause. Now, they're saying a pause. I don't know what exactly a pause means, but that was on advanced AI development. That has not happened, by the way. AI has continued to develop very, very quickly since then. But then in May, OpenAI, which is the ChatGPT company that runs
the
that,
big one.
And again, it's open source artificial intelligence. Their CEO, Sam Altman, testified before a Senate Judiciary Subcommittee about the potential dangers of AI and the need for more government intervention. Now, ironically, Elon Musk actually used to be involved with OpenAI previously.
Okay.
And now they're having a little bit of differences of opinions on, because OpenAI used to be like a not-for-profit, and now it is for profit.
Okay.
And there was a bunch of tension between all of that. So anyway, he was even arguing for more government intervention, but I kind of go back to one thing we just talked about was they're the leader in the space right now. Of course, they're asking for intervention so that no other companies can kind of encroach on their territory there. Also, recently, I got an email from Emerging Tech Brew. It's a public link to the article, and I'll link that in the show notes as well. But they said that the path to regulating AI is a challenging one, in part because legislators themselves have a lot to learn about this type of technology. And according to Aram Gavor, an associate dean at George Washington Law School who focuses on AI policy, he says that while lawmakers and their staffs will be beefing up on knowledge of AI in the coming months, that the May hearing was unusually bipartisan and collaborative.
Oh, there you go.
So that's something we don't hear very often.
Not very often.
So senators on both sides of the aisles generally agreed that we need some sort of regulation, and the witnesses pointed that out as well. So he said that that's not something you see a lot in Washington, as we've just kind of had a lot of drama on the back and forth on the debt ceiling and all of that. Having some common ground here, I think, could be something that is a good thing. So that's interesting to note as well. But Josh, I'll turn it over to you first. What are your final thoughts on regulation AI?
Yeah, I think with a lot of new technology, especially this type of technology that, in a sense, is self-learning and growing on its own, you do need to put safeguards, parameters, regulation in place to understand what's happening.
Yeah.
So I just think it's inevitable that we need that. Now, what that regulation is, I'm not smart enough to really know what is all needed, but I think there are enough experts that are available to help craft that. If the people crafting regulations are smart enough to acknowledge maybe we're not the ones that should be putting all this input in. Get the experts' opinions and then draft it from there. So I think it has to happen. It needs to happen. I think it will happen too. I think there's enough people calling for it that you're going to see some come through. But again, like you mentioned in your pros and cons, it's changing so fast that by the time they get the regulation, it may be close to outdated based on what's happened since. So yeah, it's going to be an ongoing battle for sure. What do you think?
Yeah, I think one approach that I would have in this discussion is to keep regulation at a high enough level that it can adapt.
Mm-hmm.
So don't make it so strict that it is based on what we know today, focusing on all of the available technology right now. We have to know going in that this is going to grow rapidly. This is going to advance rapidly. So making the regulation high enough level to adapt over time is key. And that way there'll be less of an impact from a legislative approach in terms of when the bills can get drafted to when they go into actual effect. Well, you could just have something that's kind of evergreen.
Yep.
It's the artificial intelligence framework of the United States of America or whatever. I think that that's key. I also think that it is going to be very challenging globally to be doing something like this.
Yeah, that's going to be the hard part.
However, I think that we've got enough common ground from some of our bigger allies. Think of places like Europe. They're also seeing the same thing we are right now.
Yeah.
And I think that we could be, at least with some of the more developed nations and more of our friendly trading partners, I guess you could say, on the same page with a lot of stuff. So I have hope for it. Again, I'm with you. I think we need it, and I think it's coming. I don't want it to be too restrictive that we're going to cause more issues than we fix.
Yeah, makes sense.
That's something that we're going to work towards over time. So yeah, that's our thoughts on regulations and AI. Thank you for listening. As always, we'd love it if you'd share this episode. Maybe you had someone asking about regulation and AI. Share this.
Maybe
episode
your
with friends and
ChatGPT bot was asking.
Ooh,
And
plug
then-
this
yeah.
link in there. That's what I'm saying. And always subscribe and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and follow us on social media, Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook. And until next week, have a good one.
Talk to you later.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Invested Dads podcast. This episode has ended, but your journey towards a better financial future doesn't have to. Head over to theinvesteddads.com to access all the links and resources mentioned in today's show. If you enjoyed this episode and we had a positive impact on your life, leave us a review, click subscribe, and don't miss the next episode. Josh Robb and Austin Wilson work for Hicks & Zerker Capital Management. All opinions expressed by Josh, Austin, or any podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinions of Hicks & Zerker Capital Management. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon for investment decisions. Clients of Hicks and Zerker Capital Management may maintain positions in the securities discussed in this podcast. There is no guarantee that the statements, opinions, or forecasts provided herein will prove to be correct. Past performance may not be indicative of future results. Indices are not available for direct investment. Any investor who attempts to mimic the performance of an index would incur fees and expenses which would reduce returns. Securities investing involves risk, including the potential for loss of principal. There is no assurance that any investment plan or strategy will be successful.